pretext stops, how we can accomplish this goal, and why San Franciscans should support it. The Coalition to End Bias Stops consists of the ACLU of Northern California, Council on American Islamic Relations of the San Francisco Bay Area, GLIDE, Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights of the San Francisco Bay Area, San Francisco Bicycle Coalition, San Francisco Public Defender, Walk SF, and a total of over 60 organizations who have signed on to our campaign to end racially biased traffic stops in San Francisco. We refer to these stops as pretext stops. Pretext stops disproportionately impact communities of color, can lead to police misconduct and use of force, and have already been banned in other jurisdictions. Many GLIDE clients and staff have been harmed by pretext stops and repeated harassment. Pretext stops further alienate some of our most marginalized neighbors, and these negative interactions perpetuate significant harms. We are, however, encouraged by the increased attention and growing consensus among city leadership, the Police Commission, the Department of Police Accountability, and SFPD that something can and should be done. We have an opportunity to listen to and be responsive to the community, and we believe San Francisco is ready to stop the pretext. With that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Brian Cox, Director of the Integrity Unit at the San Francisco Public Defender. Brian?
Thanks, Wes. And my thanks to everyone who took the time to be here today. Commissioner Carter Opestone is set to introduce a DGO tonight to ban SFPD from making certain traffic stops. I'd like to thank him for taking that first important step. And while this step is important, I want to note that we must push for an even more comprehensive end to the use of all pretexts and limit what officers can do after they perform any traffic stop. And here's why that's important. The data shows that SFPD continues to stop and search people of color at disproportionate rates. This has remained largely the same since SFPD began collecting data in 2016, and this is despite the Collaborative Reform Initiative. We've seen the results in the clients we represent, the cases the DA dismisses, the complaints filed with DPA. We have to end the incentives for officers to fish for evidence. This practice of pretext stops is a tool that police departments use here and across the country. They've used it for decades since the Supreme Court said it was legal. We can and we should do better. Other jurisdictions are taking on the same fight because they also recognize the urgency. Philadelphia, Berkeley, Los Angeles, Minneapolis, Washington, D.C., to name a few. We have to join their ranks to address these historic, stubborn disparities. But we have to do it in a way that doesn't allow loopholes or exceptions to destroy the rule. This issue isn't just important to me professionally, it's also important to me personally. I've been stopped before because of broken tail light. Instead of helping, I was made to guess what was wrong. After finally guessing correctly, and to add insult to injury, I was asked whether I had any active contact with the criminal legal system. As a child growing up in Louisiana, I wondered why my father was always so afraid of the police. As an adult, I understand why. And so I fear for my son that he will have the same experience that I had, that my father had. We have to break this cycle. Our coalition to end bias stops plans to be involved in the process to make this DGO the strongest and most comprehensive it can be. And I look forward to the work ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Our next speaker is Board President Shimon Walton.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all coming together to really stop this practice that has been in jest for a very long time. I think if we go back to 1961 and look at the Supreme Court decision, that case with Matt versus Ohio, and the court ruled that all evidence obtained by searches and seizures in violation of the Constitution is by that same authority inadmissible in state court. And I would have thought that that decision would end the continued practice of racial profiling and pretext stops. It hasn't, and in fact, this has caused major damage and distrust between law enforcement and the community. I can remember being stopped as a teenager and pulled over because I had a clear plastic covering on my license plate. It was not obstructed in any way. It was a clear covering. But this was an excuse at the time of the stop. My friends and I were berated by officers only to be let go after being harassed, pulled over only for driving while black and being young. Another incident, being pulled over because we all had on the same type of hats, beanies and baseball caps. And this time we were pulled over, officers approached the car with guns drawn and insults, like put your hands on the steering wheel, beanie head. This may not seem like much, but as a 15-year-old passenger, being approached with guns drawn is terrifying. Imagine if it was your child, your grandchild, or imagine if it was a young person that you were connected to. Or I can recall a time driving down 3rd Street, looking like a person of interest and getting pulled over while I was already in community leadership roles. Pretext stops, stopping people because they look a certain way, because you feel a certain way, is something that we have to stop, and we need to stop immediately. They're terrifying, extremely traumatizing, and it's unfortunate that this has been the status quo for Black males and brown males. And it's not normal, and it is very unacceptable.
Thank you, President Walton. Our third speaker is Felicia Jones, founder of Wealth and Disparities in the Black Community. Felicia.
Thank you. Again, my name is Felicia Jones. I am the founder of Wealth and Disparities in the Black Community. I don't know if I should say I feel honored being here, or really, I'm just kind of perturbed. And the reason why I say this is because Wealth and Disparities have been fighting this issue since 2016. We have gone to the Board of Supervisors, the mayor, the police commissions for approximately 6 years on a continuous basis. And it is a thing of racial profiling of Black people in San Francisco. Black people in San Francisco are 6 times that of whites to be stopped by the police. And if we are stopped by the police, it has led to arrest, it has led to use of force, and sometimes killings. And so again, I'm happy to see everyone here, but I really wish there was a sense of urgency 6 years ago when we made these issues available to the city and county of San Francisco and to all San Franciscans, not only the political side of San Francisco, but to everyday people who are concerned about these things. And so again, it is a use of racial profiling. The worst of it is Black people, Black San Franciscans. We are here really because of Black San Franciscans and the racial profiling of Black San Franciscans. And so no other ethnicity can come up. And it's all about being anti-Black. And the thing of it is that no one wants to really, talk about the anti-Blackness that is in San Francisco. We often say San Francisco, the golden city by the bay. We say Wealth and Disparities, San Francisco, the racist city by the bay, because of the misuse of traffic stops, racial profiling through traffic stops, the use of force and arrest that San Francisco PD has been doing since the DOJ came since 2016, and it hasn't gotten any better. And so the concern, I'm glad to see President Walton here. I'm glad to see Dean Preston, Supervisor Chan, but we have been writing letters for years to the Board of Supervisors, writing letters for years to the police commission, going to the police commission every Wednesday to talk about these issues on how Black San Franciscans are being treated. And still we have no urgency for this issue. An urgency must come, an urgency for all of you who are sitting here. It must come from you to not only protest, but to lend your voices to the unfairness of how Black people are treated in San Francisco. And it's a mess. We can't come here and politicize issues that affect Black San Franciscans. And so the thing of it is, are we going to come and make this a political issue? Are we going to come and make this a human issue, especially for Black San Franciscans? And so that's my question, not to everyone on here. And I don't do this work for photo ops, or I don't do this work to be on a press conference. I do this work because I truly, genuinely care about Black San Franciscans. And that is not to say that I'm anti-white, or I'm anti-Mexican, or I'm anti-Pacific Islander, but I am pro-Black. I am pro-Black. And I will remain to tell my truth to power until the day I die. And so we got to do better than coming together for a political stance, on this issue, and really begin to make things move at the police commission, and to have a sense of urgency of what is going on in San Francisco, by all the politicians who are on this call, and by all citizens who live in San Francisco and see what is happening to Black people of San Francisco. And the urgency is not there. It just can't be a few of us. I believe 6 years ago, if all of you guys brought your resources to the fight that we were fighting 6 years ago, we wouldn't be here today. But I guess it's better late than never. So again, it is about racial profiling of Black San Franciscans and especially Black males. Thank you.
Thank you, Felicia, for your years of commitment to this work. Our fourth speaker is District 1 Supervisor Connie Chen. Connie.
Thank you so much for having me to be part of this conversation today. I really, it's an honor to be here for this conversation, and to know that I wanted to thank all of you, but definitely the Coalition to End Bias Stops and our Commissioner, Police Commissioner Qadir Al-Amin for the work that we're about to approach today at the Police Commission, really having that discussion on the department's general order to end pretext stop. What we know that pretext stops are not just racial harassment. Pretext stops can be, and often are, lethal to those who are impacted in the situations. So it is something that it is critical to end now to save lives. We stand in solidarity, as always, that we should, among communities of color, because we know that injustice for one is injustice to all, and we ought to stand in solidarity. And today, it's part of the reason why I'm joining this conversation in solidarity, urging our police commission to really end pretext stop along with our police department. It is really critical to tackle this issue today. I appreciate what Ms. Jones have said. It is late, but it is better than never. So I urge the Police Commission to support that, and I really appreciate the spearheading the effort. It is also great to see, and I want to acknowledge my board president, President Shamant Watton, being here, as well as my colleague, Supervisor Dean Preston, who will speak later, but definitely also supporting the support coming from our public defender, Mano Raju, is really meaningful in this situation. So thank you, all of you, for the work that, not just that you have done today, but all the work that you have done years past. And but I must be also honest that the work shouldn't end today. If, even if the Police Commission stop pretext stops, because there's just so much more and so much reform that needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Chan. Our next speaker is Samina Usman, Senior Government Relations Coordinator for the Council on American Islamic Relations of the San Francisco Bay Area.
Thank you so much, Wes. Our organization was passionate about this issue because we recognize, the statistics of what is happening in San Francisco. I mean, you have SFPD stopping Black people at least 6 times as much as white people, and searched at least 10 times the rate of white people, and at least 12 times more likely used a force on Black people than white people. I mean, these are incredibly alarming numbers and statistics. And even if it's just one person, that's incredibly alarming. But to see the vast numbers, it's definitely an issue, and that needs to be resolved. And this is why we hope that the board will be able to pass this initiative. San Francisco is home to a number of mosques, and we have a large Muslim population living over there, of all races and backgrounds, primarily African American and also the Yemeni descent. And oftentimes, and one of the pretexts for stopping cars is if you have something hanging from your rear view mirror. And a lot of Muslim community members have something called a tasbih, or prayer beads, or even a little copy of a Quran or some type of prayer hanging from their rear view, their mirrors. And this is a pretext for stopping these cars. And I've actually had friends, multiple friends, who have been stopped for this reason and this reason alone. There's been no safety violation. There's been no other issue besides this. And in one case, one of my friends, the police officer became a bit aggressive, and they were only able to get out of the situation when one member of the car said, "Hey, my relative is on the police force," and then that ended up bringing things down a bit. But one shouldn't have to mention that they have a relative in the police department, or that they know somebody in the police department, in order to ensure their safety and that they're being treated right. It should not be, people should not be stopped for such minor reasons. And this is why we're so passionate about this initiative. And we want to make sure to keep our residents safe, to make sure that people are not being stopped for ridiculous pretexts. And that people are not being stopped because we see that the racial bias associated with these type of stops. And so, we're proud to be a part of this coalition of organizations that is pushing for this. And we truly hope that the commission and then ultimately the board will pass this as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Samina. Our next speaker is District 5 Supervisor Dean Preston.
Thanks so much, and thank you, the Coalition to End Bias Stops, for inviting me to speak today, and for all of your work in bringing this proposal forward. Really proud to be here with you all, and with my colleagues, President Walton and Supervisor Chan, as well as all the folks from the Public Defender's Office under the leadership of our Public Defender, Mano Raju, and the police commissioners and all the community leaders. Really pleased to be here and show my support for ending pretext stops in San Francisco. During my 2 years in office, I have heard a lot of talk in City Hall about public safety and about police reform. My office has tried to focus on results and outcomes, not just on rhetoric and promises. In my first year, we worked with many of you around banning the knee to neck restraint that police used to kill George Floyd. We've consistently opposed increases to the police budget. We've opposed the revival of war on drugs rhetoric by some city leaders. And we have insisted that SFPD report not just on the number of reforms completed and that are in progress, but also on measurable impacts of the reforms, and specifically on racial disparities in stops, arrests, and use of force. At the board, we have heard countless reports on reform measures. We've heard about SFPD's bias-free policing initiative. We've heard assurances that the department will keep working on reducing racial disparities. But the truth is in the data, and San Francisco police officers are continuing to stop, search, and use force against Black and brown people at extreme and unacceptable rates that are higher than in most other major cities. We face nothing short of a crisis in San Francisco of racism in policing, as others have spoken to, and regardless of how much money the department spends on trying to downplay that fact or divert our attention from it, it really is time for us to act boldly to address this crisis. Others have spoken to it already, but I want to highlight that really pretext stops have long provided the legal loophole for racial profiling and harassment of certain communities. And we've seen its effects play out in our police interactions and our jail data. And there's absolutely no reason that this has to continue. Our city has shown time and again, we can come together to protect the civil rights of the most vulnerable, where these communities have been abandoned and been neglected by the state and federal governments and by the courts. And in this case, other cities who have actually led the way on banning pretext stops have shown that this is one reform that actually works to reduce racial disparities. So my message is simple: let's put our money where our mouth is. If our city is serious about addressing racism in policing. We just have to do everything in our power to ban pretext stops. It's really an honor to be a partner to this coalition. I appreciate all the work, and together we can end bias stops in our city and finally make a dent on the practices that have led police to disproportionately target and harm Black and brown communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Preston. Our next speaker is Qadir Al-Amin, Senior Community Organizer with the San Francisco Bike Coalition. Claire.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Qadir Al-Amin, and I'm a senior community organizer at the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition. A little bit about myself: I was born and raised in the Tenderloin, and for the last 6 years have been working on street safety campaigns in the downtown area. Our organization is part of the coalition to end bias stops because we have seen too many instances locally and nationwide where traffic stops had led to the killings of Black and brown people. And as street safety advocates, this issue was important to us for a variety of reasons, mainly because we've been averaging 28 to 30 traffic fatalities per year since 2014. And for far too long, we have relied on police to enforce traffic laws, while data has shown us their ineffectiveness in preventing or stopping traffic collisions. We know the communities most affected by this are low-income Black communities and communities of color who are already over-policed as it is. That is why at the height of civil unrest in 2020, we partnered with the Tenderloin Community Benefit District on a campaign to identify community-based alternatives to police for traffic enforcement. And for over a year, we conducted outreach virtually and in person, where we heard so many similar stories from community members about police stopping them for things like jaywalking, it leading to an arrest for something completely different, while vehicles are speeding or blasting through red lights as the interaction is occurring. It is so wild but unsurprising that so many people share that same story. Pretextual stops are non-life-threatening violations. They are racially biased stops and a street safety issue that negatively impacts our vulnerable communities the most. We appreciate this issue being raised. It's a really great starting place, but we'd like to see a more comprehensive list that includes all pretextual violations. We are committed to doing this work, and we are committed to doing this work with the Coalition to End Bias Stops in the city to see an end to pretextual stops once and for all. Thank you so much. It is such an honor to be here with you all.
Thank you, Claire. Our next speaker is San Francisco Public Defender, Mano Raju.
Thank you, and I want to appreciate all the supervisors and coalition members who gathered here to bring attention to this absolutely crucial issue. Being a person of color while driving, bicycling, or walking should not make you a target. And we know from what we see with our own eyes here in the city and from press headlines around the country that this is real. And because courts have sanctioned this practice, we see it reflected in the people we represent every day. And that takes an economic toll, takes a physical toll, it takes a psychological toll, and it impacts people intergenerationally. Pretext stops are not making our streets safer for those who walk, bike, or drive. They're fishing expeditions to prolong the stop to investigate something wholly unrelated to the stop. And these are biased, they harm community relations, and they instill fear and terror in overly policed communities. And it's to the person who's stopped, but also to the child who has to witness that indignity, that fear, that person being handcuffed. It affects not just the individual, it affects their community. It affects the person who gets the call home who says, you know, my relative is being pulled over and I'll come get the car. It has a spillover effect. It does real damage. We can and should do better. Being focused on public safety also means being focused on the harm done by policing to already underserved and marginalized communities of color. And we see this every day. We see the harm of state-sponsored violence on the over 20,000 people, clients, and communities that we represent every year. Instead of stopping people for riding a bicycle without a helmet, how about handing out a helmet? Instead of ticketing people for sleeping in a car, how about investing in public housing and transportation. We don't need to criminalize poverty when we know that collateral consequences are so severe and out of step with our values. There are deep institutional problems inherent to pretext stops, and the commission has the power to end these racially biased pretext stops. And I'm grateful that our team and this coalition has been advocating for over a year, in fact, for several years, to bring this to the commission. Now's the time. Now's the time to make policy, to make it even stronger, and to eliminate bias stops. Thank you.
Thank you, Mano. Our next speaker is Police Commissioner Jesus Yanez. The floor is yours.
Thank you all for putting this together. I'm really grateful for being a part of this coalition, and for as a member of the Police Commission, I'm really appreciative of Commissioner Oberstone Carter proceeding with revising the DGO and creating an opportunity for us to repair some of the damage that has been done by this racial profiling method of policing. I think that we are very clear and very sure that we know that embarking on these pretext stops, looking for the low-hanging fruit, does not correlate with reducing criminal activity. It does absolutely nothing pretty much for improving public safety outcomes. And as we have continued to work in the direction of reforming our police department practices, we know that this is the right direction to take. It's a great first step. And I fully endorse the direction and support the reform efforts, and know that this will be a tangible, will have tangible impacts on the racial disparities that we continue to see. I think one of the goals is also with the understanding that we have a police force who has been severely impacted by the COVID pandemic, as far as having fewer officers to respond to calls. This is actually going to help us better utilize the limited resources that we have to impact and focus our energy on improving the safety outcomes of San Francisco versus, criminalizing, in a lot of cases, economic challenges. The personal story or history that I will share with this issue is, I think Public Defender Manu Raju indicated the consequences of these pretext stops on the families of individuals who are unfortunately stopped for not having a tag or an updated tag on their vehicle. I remember being in a vehicle with my family members and having to exit that vehicle, having to pay the fines that then come along with a vehicle being towed. And when you talk about the most impacted, the most severely economically disadvantaged communities, having to then deal with the economic impacts and the legal consequences of these stops. And that isn't even touching on the potential for an escalation of this police contact. What we're trying to do is minimize the police footprint on incidents that have nothing to do with public safety and improving our public safety outcomes. So I fully support the direction that we are taking with reducing racial disparities by eliminating pretext stops. We know that there are racially biased undertones in these, and the more we collect, data to be able to inform what other pretext stops we need to include in this DGO revision, we will continue to do that in order to have better outcomes for all of our constituents in San Francisco. I thank the coalition for putting this together. And all the advocates that have historically been working on this issue. It is long overdue. Thank you so much. I appreciate this time.
Thank you, Commissioner Inez. Our final speaker is Police Commissioner Kevin Benedicto.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank everyone for being here today and coming together on this critically important issue. I really like to commend the huge cross-section of San Franciscans and community groups that are here today and have worked on this issue. Over 60 organizations signed the last open letter that the commission received. And I'd also like to acknowledge Supervisors Chan, Preston, and President Walton for being here today as well. I'm so eager and excited for Commissioner Max Carter-Oberstone to officially introduce the draft general order to kick off this issue today, and I'm committed to helping in any way I can to advance this issue. It's simply unacceptable, the racial disparity in stops. Black San Franciscans are between 6 and 10 times more likely to be stopped and searched, and 12 times more likely to be subject to a use of force as compared to white San Franciscans. This is unacceptable. And as commissioner, I plan to work with my fellow commissioners to end biased traffic stops to address these disparities. As you all know, this item is up on the agenda for the Police Commission tonight, and it will kick off an intense period of community collaboration, feedback, and public comment to all the organizations and people on this call. We need your voice. We need this energy. I think, like Ms. Jones said, we need urgency on this, and I hope that we are able to devote the same energy and urgency as we revise and finalize this policy. I look forward to this policy being drafted, being worked with in collaboration with the community. I look forward to voting to pass a great policy, hopefully a policy that is really leading the nation in its effectiveness. And also, importantly, as commissioner, looking forward to overseeing its implementation and ensuring the training and implementation and where the rubber meets the road, that the policy is implemented and we can make progress in ending racially biased stops in San Francisco. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Commissioner Benedicto. That completes our program. If there are any questions, we'll take those now, submit them through the chat, or we'll call on you. We do have a few already. The first one is the numbers being given in terms of rate in which SFPD white people get the source of that information. Also, a brief description of the policy being introduced tonight would be helpful. I'll direct that question to Brian Cox, of the Public Defender.
Sure. Thanks, Wes, and I think thanks for the question. I think it's a good one. You know, the data that I think is commonly cited, you know, we've pulled from the 96A reports and the state RIPA report. You can also, you know, find those citations in our coalition letter. I think most recently in on February 2nd, the police department presented some of this information, and you can check it out on the commission website there to get the actual citations and stats. Yeah, but this is data that we get from their department. I think there was a second part of that question, sort of a brief overview of the policy. I don't want to steal, you know, Max's thunder for tonight, but I guess I'll just kind of outline three brief pieces of it. The first is there's a ban on certain types of stops. I think it's more than a dozen actual vehicle and traffic codes that officers can no longer pull someone over for. The second component to that is once, you know, there's a ban on sort of what an officer can do in any traffic situation, whether it's asking consent to search or asking questions that are unrelated to the underlying traffic stops. So like, you know, where are you from? What are you doing here? There's also questions, officers can't ask questions related to probation or parole. But I think, you know, you can really read the details of that in his actual proposal. There are some exceptions to those issues. And the final piece is a data collection piece where it allows the commission to have a period of review and requires officers to report this data whenever they do make a stop.
Thank you, Brian. We have another question, and that is, the police union is in an active campaign to recall our district attorney, a police union that has made clear they do not want to be accountable for the actions of their officers. What will be done to enforce accountability without more money for training, etc.? Asking them to change is ineffective. Losing their jobs, being suspended without pay, etc. could be. In truth, we need to decrease the amount of police in the force. I'll direct this to Brian as well.
Sure, thanks for that. I think it's a great question, and I think it also signals why we need such a strong policy. You know, I think that the coalition we're advocating for a much more robust policy, more stops that are banned, no exceptions, just consent search questions, because we really want to see those disparities come down. I mentioned this earlier. The data has been relatively consistent for the past half dozen years with respect to the disparate rates of stops and searches, and we have to be comprehensive and I think thorough in our approach to this, and not allow for any backsliding. Because I think one fear that we all have is we have a policy that isn't strong enough, right? These disparities are going to continue. And so all of us will have just wasted all of our time putting this in place to see nothing change, right? And so I think, to answer the question, what are we really going to do to shift this? I have great hope that a strong policy will get that done. And I encourage everyone, if they haven't, to read our coalition letter, because it really explains in detail why we think this is critically important. And so, with that, suspending someone from their job, those are solutions, and obviously, cutting the size of the police force is a solution. But we still live in a reality where the officers are going to make these stops, and we have to address that issue. We have to bring the disparate rates down, and I think this is going to be an important tool to do that. We have to just push to make sure that it's strong and it's comprehensive, and that there are no exceptions to this because of the harm done to the community from these stops. Public Defender Manova, as you mentioned, that the harm done to the families, the children to see their parents, this happened to their parents. And so we have to think about that. We have to think about our public safety discussion in terms of how it impacts the people who are already over-policed, already marginalized, and historically underfunded. So I think this is a great start in that direction.
Thank you, Brian. We have one more speaker who I'm going to introduce right now, and that is Imam Abu Qadir Al-Amin. Imam, please go ahead.
Yes, I'm Imam Abu Qadir Al-Amin. I'm a Muslim leader in San Francisco. Muslims have been a part of the fabric of the society of San Francisco since 1958. We are primarily a religious community that is representative of the diversity we see in San Francisco, many of whom are African Americans, and we are supporting this effort to stop the bias stops, and we are aware that this is learned behavior that can be unlearned. It's long overdue. We believe that we can make a difference, but we have to change mindsets and attitudes toward all of the citizenry of San Francisco and the United States as a whole. So we are very much supportive, and I could tell you about experiences that I have personally, but I'll just suffice it to say that the behavior that is learned by new police officers is learned from old police officers who continue to perpetuate some of the biases that exist that we need to eradicate. Thank you for allowing me to be here with so many distinguished servants of the public, and we hope that this effort will be successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Imam. If there are no more questions, we can wrap up at this point. Thank you to members of the press for attending, and thank you to all of our speakers and for the hard work that's being done on this issue. This evening is the pending introduction of Commissioner Max Carter Oberstone's proposal at the Police Commission, and we will be there.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers. I'm wondering if you're all still here, if we could try to turn on your cameras for a moment so we can take a screenshot. I know not everyone was here at the beginning. So anyone who was speaking as part of this press conference would love to do that if you're comfortable with turning on your camera for a moment. We may have